Hello, and welcome to another episode of the CIRS Group podcast. I'm Barbara.
And I'm Christian.
And we are doing, I'm having Christian here with me because I'm doing a nerding out moment on a really I don't want to say terrible reality show. It's obvi a very popular reality show. And it's not going to be all about the show. It's actually about a specific player within that show. That show, if you haven't gathered from the title of this video, is about the secret lives of Mormon wives. The season three is out on Hulu now at this point, just came out. And the person that we want to talk about is one of the wives of this show and her name is Mikayla Matthews.
Mhm.
So we want to dive into that. Before we get into all this, we'll explain why in a second. But if you are new to this channel, I'm Barbara. I'm a co-founder of the CIRS Group, which is an online community for people suffering with a chronic illness called CIRS, or chronic inflammatory response syndrome. Normally, I have JC with me, but she's off today. Instead, we have Christian, who has his own group. Christian, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a cognitive neuroscientist by training academically, and I have my own community called CIRS Lab for patients and medical practitioners who focus on treating CIRS. And so we provide educational content through those platforms, and I'm also involved in research actively for this illness that we're going to be talking about in the case of Mikayla. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and as a disclaimer, though Christian is a doctor, he's not a medical doctor,
Thank you.
and
Yes.
I'm a health coach, but I'm also not a doctor. So please, none of this should be considered medical advice. You should always talk to your doctor about what your symptoms are and issues, are, and get guidance from a practitioner, preferably a CIRS literate practitioner, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. I also want to just say outright, we're not diagnosing Mikayla
Hmm.
Matthews. We can't, where it's not possible for us to do. I don't know her. We don't know her at all. No contact with her whatsoever. But she has been so brave talking about her trauma, and she's been super transparent about her chronic medical issues, and she still suffers to this day after doing so many things to try to get better over I think her whole life, but especially in the last few years, especially while she's been more famous because of the show. Um, and because her symptoms look so painfully familiar to Christian and I as CIRS patients, we just want to make the suggestion that she look into CIRS. And if you are relating to some of the health issues she's experienced, we want you to also consider CIRS as a potential not option, but like answer for why you've been struggling with chronic illness for so long and why everything you've tried isn't making it better. Because Christian and I are both living proof, thankfully, that there is a treatment that will make you better. And it is difficult, it's complex, and it takes time, and it's expensive, and it sucks. But at the same time, if you're living with this level of pain like she is, we know that the answer is worth looking into and trying at the end of the day. So, that's my disclaimer for all of that. Um, and I guess quickly also to explain, if you've never heard of The Secret Lives of Mormon Wives, well, I understand. It's reality TV. It's not for everyone. Some people like that stuff, some people don't. I do watch some reality TV. It's a very helpful way for me to kind of shut off mentally from all of this, all the work that I do. I am involved in the chronic illness community, so it's nice to watch a silly, fluffy, overly dramatic reality show to kind of, relax. That said, obviously, I couldn't turn off this part of my brain when I started learning about Michaela's story, because of how much her illness looks like CIRS. So that is what we want to talk about today. And brief summary, the show is about a group of Mormon women in Utah attempting to balance their faith and family life and influencer careers. And Mormon culture tends to encourage a picture perfect image, and the show kind of humanizes them by showing some of the tougher stuff going on under the surface. So that's if you've never watched it, maybe you'll go watch it now, or maybe you'll think that's not really for me, and both of those are fine. So, with all that said, One more thing, trigger warning. We are going to be talking about child abuse, and other really difficult topics today. So if that's difficult for you, just want you to know that before we dive in. So thank you again, Christian, for being here
Yeah,
with me on this ride to talk about this story.
yeah, I'm all for it. And I think this is an opportunity for us to uh, raise some educational awareness at different levels, and hopefully we'll try to do that in a you know humble but highly informative way for people who have CIRS and people who perhaps have never heard from CIRS, all of
Yeah,
those. So I'm excited.
yeah, definitely. Um, the reason that we are talking about Mikayla is, she has shared and a podcast episode you may be interested in if you want to learn more about her story is, it's titled Mikayla Matthews Finding Her Voice on the Squeeze podcast.
Mm.
That's on YouTube. It now has 150,000 views at the time of us recording. So they actually go into very detailed narrative of like her whole childhood. So I'll cover just a little bit here so you guys have some context for what we're going to talk about. But one clue in her history is that she grew up in Southern California, which is where I grew up as well, in a moldy, toxic home. And moldy as in definitely mold on the walls growing in, like they know that the house was moldy. So that's clue number one. She has had a history of exposure. And then her parents divorced at age 9, when she was age 9, at which point she moved to Utah, and she comments that she felt better when they moved. She had a lot of eczema as a child, and when she moved to Utah, she noticed a general improvement, which is something that I think a lot of people with CIRS will notice if they move out of a bad environment, whether they know that environment's bad or not,
Mhm.
into a unknowingly perhaps into a better environment, a less moldy situation, they will notice some symptoms kind of going away a little bit. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit more on the science of that, Christian.
Well, actually, so maybe I'm tempted to link this to the eczema because that
Yeah.
is
Hmm.
a symptom that she mentions. I had the chance to check out this podcast. I thought it was a uh, very insightful podcast into her life. It's actually how I got to know about her because I didn't know about her story, and it's really interesting. And one of the recurrent issues that she's had throughout her life is eczema. And one of the things she mentioned, just to say it at this level, is that she would, whenever she left California, her eczema flares would go away. So it was, probably connected first and foremost to the house where there's mold. And maybe I'll just now segue just for people who don't know, right? So when we're talking about CIRS or chronic inflammatory response syndrome, we're talking about a chronic illness where our immune system has a really hard time dealing with exposure to certain toxins from certain microbial organisms, most commonly found in water damaged buildings where you're going to see a lot of molds, you're going to see bacteria growing in those environments. And so these types of organisms that grow in those moldy houses release what we call biotoxins. There's a portion of the population that carries certain genes that make them almost unable or inefficient at when you encounter those toxins, they go into your body. The immune system doesn't quite do the job in terms of tagging them and eliminating them from your body. So what ends up happening is we generate this inflammatory response from one side of the immune system. We call it the innate immune system. It's the part of your immune system that you're born with. That part of the immune system becomes very triggered when it sees these biotoxins and it causes all this inflammatory activity. Um, and the problem with CIRS patients is that they can turn on that inflammation, but they can't turn it off properly. And this is something that we can develop over time, right? As we get older, we get exposed into moldy homes like the one that Mikayla was describing. And I'm just introducing CIRS at a very general level to try to add
Yeah.
context. Why is mold a problem in the first place? And it's because, well, if it's the case that she is someone who's susceptible to developing this illness, CIRS, and she was exposed in these environments, that's going to start triggering this inflammatory activity in the body that can manifest itself in all kinds of symptoms some of which or many of which might look completely unrelated to one another, but there are, we have a scientific and medical understanding of the mechanisms. How is it that all these symptoms happen? And I guess, I don't know if we want to jump into eczema more
Well,
deeply, but yeah, I'll,
no, I that was a fantastic foundation. And just to kind of add actually onto the genetic piece, and let's cover eczema more in a second, but like the other thing that she mentioned in that podcast episode is that her father, who owned that house, and he stayed living there after her mom and siblings moved to Utah, that father was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's, and he had a lot of arthritis, and I think he's still to this day suffering with a lot of health issues, all related to that. And I want to point this out because you mentioned that this is genetic. Not everyone can have CIRS genetically. And in fact, I believe the statistics are around 24-25% of the population has one of the genetic haplotypes that makes you susceptible to not being able to deal with mold or other biotoxins, exactly how Christian just described. So the fact that her father has obviously, become sick within a moldy home. And then Parkinson's, we can touch a little bit on that and like why CIRS might lead to Parkinson's, where it's
Mhm.
a hypothesis in the CIRS community right now. And then the fact that obviously she is related to him.
Yeah,
And that may also explain why maybe her mom never got sick.
yeah,
Maybe some of her other siblings never got sick to this level. But she definitely would share some genes with her father, and that would make another point to a potential clue as to CIRS being her issue. So, do you want to
yeah.
talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, one thing I was going to add also is she mentioned in the interview that her dad would have a lot of coughing. I think well, they were living in this place and he would do a
Yeah,
lot of NyQuil and things like that.
yeah,
And it seemed like a very chronic problem that was just there and there. And he might have been the type of person, again, I'm going to make these disclaimers over and over just to make sure this is not medical diagnosis. We can't do that. But if, let's assume that there is a susceptibility for CIRS, he may have been a person where he perhaps didn't fully trigger CIRS because, again, CIRS is an environmentally acquired illness. A lot of us, and both me and Barbara, we had a fairly highly functional life. Like I did a lot of exercise. I did a lot of things up until age 32 when I started to have a lot of unexplained symptoms. And that actually fits with Mikayla, which is she said about 3 years ago, it's when things start to really get out of control with symptoms, right? And so she's had a life where there's been all kinds of issues, but for the most part, you kind of look like a normal person with some issues here and there, and they start getting worse. And then there's a point where your body says enough,
yeah.
right? So I just wanted to add that little piece that I thought was interesting. Going back to the Parkinson's, um, uh, the connection here with CIRS is, at least this is the best sort of model or understanding we have to date about how CIRS can potentially lead to neurodegenerative diseases, more generally, including Parkinson's. Is, well, this inflammatory activity that I described from the immune system, it starts in the brain. It starts in very specific parts of the brain that are very important for regulating your body, regulating your hormones, regulating your circadian activity. That includes sleep, that includes motility, um, also pain, activity. All these different basic physiological systems are regulated in these brain regions that become very triggered by this inflammatory activity initially. And over time, that's going to cause all kinds of depletions in very important hormones and biomarkers, or yeah, hormones would be really the entry point that are really important for regulating your entire body. And so CIRS patients will start depleting that pool of those hormones. And then at some point, your body will say, hey, I'm going crazy. And so then you have this unchecked or sort of indefinite inflammatory activity happening in the brain. It starts making the body very permeable, meaning your skin, your gut, your blood-brain barrier, which is a protective layer that protects your brain from any infections, toxins from crossing over into your brain because the brain is an extremely sacred and important organ. It's very well protected, but in CIRS, it becomes very vulnerable. And that over time, combined with ongoing exposure to these biotoxins that keep triggering the body, is going to contribute to creating an inflammatory activity that can then over time, over many years, 10, 15, 20, 30 years, can start inducing what we call atrophy of the brain or just shrinkage of brain regions. And once you're on that path, you are potentially opening your susceptibility to a neurodegenerative disease like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, those are very common outcomes that we see in CIRS patients who don't get treated. It's often either Parkinson's or something like Alzheimer's disease or a form of dementia. In fact, one of the things we see with CIRS patients before they have any neurodegenerative disease is if you look into their brain, there's a test called the neuroquant that analyzes the volumes or how much brain tissue you have for specific brain regions. There is one brain region called the caudate that systematically becomes atrophied or shrunk in CIRS patients, even if they're like 30 years old. We see it. I have it. A lot of people have this pattern with CIRS. We can measure it. And the caudate is a region that's actually very important for, or that it's associated strongly with Parkinson's disease because of the activity or the functions that are involved in that particular brain region. So even before you have any Parkinson's, CIRS already has like a blueprint in the brain that it already sets you up into like a Parkinsonian type of profile. It doesn't mean you're gonna get Parkinson's. It just means it's like a risk factor essentially. But anyways,
Right.
that's the story there with that.
Yeah, no, that's great. And if anyone listening is interested in getting a neuroquant, it's basically an MRI without contrast. And we have several episodes actually on the CIRS Group podcast about the neuroquant. So if you want to learn more, I'll link those below. But that's something anybody can get that test and see how their brain is doing, basically. And I mean, if it's something that you're worried about, maybe Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, things like that run in your family, I think it's worth looking at, seeing where how your brain is doing because your brain can be inflamed where you actually it's swollen beyond what it should be. That's how my brain is, by the way, right now. And then, or it can also be atrophic, where the inflammation has gone on long enough that it starts to shrink just to protect itself. And that's something that Christian has shared also that's his situations. And we're both working through treatment to be able to repair that. And it is repairable, is the important thing to note.
Yeah.
So, side tangent on that, but I do want to just point out one more clue from her history that unfortunately can relate to, but she was sexually abused at
Mhm.
several different times throughout her childhood by different people even. And she doesn't go into detail, but she shares all of this. Nothing I'm sharing is anything new. By the way, this is all on podcasts or in the show or on her Instagram or TikTok accounts. You can see, learn more about her there. Um, and when one case, it was her mother's boyfriend and I think now husband, and the mother didn't believe her about it when she went to her mother, and then she ended up having to move out and live with her sister as a result. Like I can't even imagine. Like I didn't have that part in my history, thank God. If I told someone, they believed me, and so I can't even imagine mustering up the courage to share something like that and then being rejected by the one person that's supposed to be taking care of you, your own mother. So, the reason I bring that up is that let's say, 24-25% of the population has CIRS. Just because or I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that, has the genetics for CIRS. That doesn't mean they will have CIRS. They
Mhm.
need to have exposure, which is what we talked about with her growing up in a moldy home, but they also need to have a trigger. And the exposure can be the trigger, but more often than not, a lot of people who end up with CIRS have some traumatic event that they've been through in their life. It could be a really bad car accident. It could be neglectful or abusive parents. It could be sexual abuse, like we're talking about now. It can be, I mean, it can be anything and it will be different degrees of it. It could even be really terrible bullying. Like it just
Mhm.
depends on what the person is extra sensitive to and what they end up dealing with in their life. And when you have that level of trauma, mental and physical, emotional trauma, that's going to potentially turn on the gene that is going to cause this whole cascade of a breakdown of the systems of your body, basically, and this immune dysregulation because your body's just kind of freaking out and trying its best to handle all of this stuff that's coming at it.
Yeah.
So I just want to point that out as well, that that is an important factor in this illness. And unfortunately, she definitely has that in her history as well.
And can I add, this
Please.
is such an important point. Uh, it's important to understand because often, when we are like, oh, we have trauma, it's just an emotional thing. And yes, there is a big element of that. Um, when our bodies are healthy physiologically, our bodies are able to endure and process stress in an appropriate manner where we're able to integrate, we're able to sort of reconcile things. But what happens when your physiology is disrupted and your biology, your whole body, right? And starting with the immune system, when your immune system is not working properly, and then there is a genetic basis that increases the risk for you to having that faulty immune response, and then you start having inflammation in the brain. And when it comes to emotional processing and all these things, right? The brain it's the foundation of all of that.
Yeah.
So when you start adding all of that, then you start thinking a little bit different about trauma and emotional experiences. That yes, of course, there is an emotional component that's contributing to all of that because it's just added stress to your body. But
Right.
underneath all of that is this physiological piece that's very connected to the environment you're living in, right? If it's a moldy environment, there's water damage, there's a lot of biotoxin activity, your body's ability to deal with stress and to be able to recover from it to properly becomes extremely impaired, right? And that's what
Right.
you see often with CIRS patients. And it gets to a point where we start doing and I went myself through this. I started doing a lot of therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, because I was having a lot of anxiety and I couldn't understand what's going on. I was doing mindfulness. I was doing EMDR, and when I started developing the CIRS, I could none of that was really working for me, and it got to a point where now the biology, the inflammation was taking over. And I guess I wanted to add that little thing for everybody to think a little bit about what does it mean, right? To have inflammation, how can that impact all these different experiences that we have and how we deal with them?
Right. Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's where we can now talk a little bit more about her symptoms because she's
Mm-hmm.
been thankfully, and I really appreciate her transparency and sharing her story. I know a lot of people get inspired from, watching her be determined to figure this out and to share all of the symptoms she's going through. I know a lot of people in her comments are saying, "Oh, I have the same thing," or "I'm going through similar issues." So that's why we want to talk about that and all the things that she's tried too that don't seem to have helped 100% or even 50%. Sometimes she'll get a little bit better, but then she'll have a flare up. So we'll talk about that. Some of the things that she brought up that we've already mentioned, she had eczema since she was little. It was worse in the California home, got a little better when she moved to Utah. And then a few years ago, like Christian said, I think she mentioned it was like the birth of her third child, maybe was one of the factors where it just kind of pushed her body was pushed over the edge, and now everything has gotten much worse.
Yeah.
What does that mean? Let's get more specific. She has episodes of passing out, felt like her body was shutting down. She had multiple infections, constant infections, allergies, eczema, again, like I've said a million times, hives, itchiness, even where there weren't rashes, like her skin was just itchy. A condition called mollescum, which was just like broken, like just little holes, basically, it looked like in her skin that would scab over. Consistent yeast infections, thrush, Rashes were spreading. She went on steroids, and that didn't help. It actually made things worse. Her whole body was bright red at times. She had a fear of going to sleep. That's a symptom I know I've had. Full body, what she only could describe as nerve damage with tingling and burning to the extent that she couldn't wear clothes for months because her skin was so sensitive. And I know that sounds dramatic maybe to somebody who has never had CIRS or never heard of this, but that's real. And we know people who have dealt with very similar things, unfortunately.
I'm one of them.
Um, yeah, exactly. Like this is a very real thing that can happen when CIRS is kind of allowed to run rampant. Um, and just a couple more symptoms to go over, but skin blisters, wounds, constant crying from the pain, which is just like my heart breaks to hear that, and vertigo so bad that she had to stop driving for a period of time. And again, she doesn't experience all of these things I've listed all of the time, which is really, for lack of a better word, a mind fuck when you're going through all of that because it's like, oh, I'll change my diet and oh, I'm starting to get better. Okay, cool. And then all of a sudden you get another flare for what seems like no reason. And you're just trying to piece together what the heck happened. So I've talked a long time about symptoms, and I know Christian has some like really actually scientific and real insight on some of this. So, Christian, what are some thoughts that came to you when I was listing those off?
Yeah, no, this is great. I think overall, a lot of what you just, okay, I'll lead with the disclaimer, not a medical diagnosis or evaluation. It's not
Right,
coming from that place. Just what we can try to do is connect things that we know often show up in CIRS patients and things that have been already established in scientific literature more generally that would help potentially add some context to what could be happening
right.
here. Overall, a lot of this sounds like there's a lot of disruption in the skin, right?
Hmm.
With a lot of this, including the starting with the eczema, and I'll make some additional comments on that. But also,
Yeah,
it seems like viral reactivities, hives, all these things, right? It's like the skin is having a really hard time. Well, it turns out there are biological mechanisms that can explain what's going on there, and this is something we see so often with CIRS patients, those kinds of symptoms, and that weird fluctuation of, oh, it goes away, comes back, goes away. And then the doctors are trying to figure out what do we do, and they can't figure it out. And you're trying just about any modality. And then there's a gradual worsening of these things, and suddenly things just a second or third wave comes through, and it's even worse. And so that's very prototypical CIRS patient. If you're someone who is having those kinds of issues. Again, not a diagnosis, but I would say strongly warrant a diagnosis to get tested for CIRS. And there are biomarkers that are used to make the CIRS diagnosis. And maybe we can talk a little bit more about that towards the end, more
yeah,
formally, of what that can look like.
yep.
Going back to the eczema, well, so the eczema is at its core, it's an inflammatory activity that's strongly associated with loss of skin barrier function. So your skin has these layers. I'm going to be oversimplify this and I hope I don't upset, but right, we have all these tissues in the body, the skin, our sinuses, our mucosa and the upper respiratory tracts, the lungs, the gut, the whole digestive tract, right? There's like mucosal tissues. And when everything is healthy in your body, these tissues are nice and tight. They're tightly controlled to prevent foreign things from crossing over into your bloodstream so easily. And that includes the skin. The skin is a barrier that, right, protects us from all kinds of foreign things flying around and having very easy access into our body. The gut is another one, and the upper respiratory one, right? And that's often we'll experience colds and flus. This is the immune system really protecting those barriers, making sure there's an infection coming in. We're not going to let it go into the bloodstream. It's going to stay in the barriers. Okay, so it turns out in CIRS patients, there's this hormone. I mentioned that there are these hormones that become dysfunctional. There's this one hormone called melanocyte stimulating hormone, alpha melanocyte stimulating hormone, or alpha MSH. And this hormone is primarily secreted in a part of the brain called the pituitary gland. And that's sort of for systemic use or function in the body. This hormone is perhaps the most important hormone you've never heard of. It's a regulating hormone. One of the things it does is it keeps our immune system nice and balanced so that we don't spill over into CIRS. So when we start losing MSH, which we do and we can measure it with blood testing, the immune system starts to become very uneven in how it communicates and resolve inflammation. So, but it does a bunch of other things. It regulates stress response. It regulates all these circadian systems like sleep. So if you have sleep disturbances, if you have motility, weird issues with your motility, if you have issues with menstrual cycles in your woman, and there's some weird things going on there, even fertility, all of those things are running circadian cycles. MSH is really important. Also, regulation, this is the point that I want to make, of the permeability or integrity of these skin barriers, gut barriers becomes compromised. You're much more at higher risk of experiencing what a lot of people call leaky gut in the gut. But you can also start experiencing a kind of leaky skin phenomenon when you start losing that systemic MSH. And in fact, there's all kinds of literature that have correlated eczema severity to MSH activity in the skin. And it's also been correlated to another biomarker that we see abnormal in CIRS called MMP9. And that's a pro-inflammatory marker. When it's high, it means there's a lot of activity from the immune system triggering a lot of inflammation. And in CIRS patients, we see chronic elevation of that. And one of the things that that does over time is like it can make your blood-brain barrier leaky, and it can contribute to just permeability in all these tissues across the board, including the skin, right? The other marker that might be relevant here is one that's called VEGF or VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. That's what it stands for. We see it abnormal in CIRS patients. Usually it's low, but sometimes we see it elevated as well. And this is a marker that's directly connected to blood vessel formation. So when it's abnormal, there's going to be a lot of uh, permeability with vascular permeability, poor oxygen delivery. And so blood vessels can become very leaky, and that can contribute to your skin becoming very overwhelmed. All of these three markers, there's actually really good literature linking eczema to abnormalities in all three markers. So all this to say that in the context of Mikayla, this is a very prominent symptom historically for her. There is a way to potentially connect this directly to CIRS that she may be potentially experiencing these ups and downs with MSH, fluctuating, maybe it's starting to drop, and as that drops, the skin might feel more leaky or might become a little more leaky, and then these other markers like MMP9 become elevated. They contribute to more leakiness with the inflammatory activity, and those could be sort of the basic ingredients for triggering something like eczema. So
Yeah, no, that's great. And like that's I guess I hope it's hard because I we're being very respectful or trying to be, and like we're not diagnosing her. But boy, we want to paint a picture so that she or anybody who relates to her illnesses or her symptoms, I should say, is at least curious enough to check. So let's talk quickly about the diagnosing CIRS. And I have another podcast episode from way back when where we covered how to tell if you have CIRS. So you can go watch that for more detail. But there is one particular thing anyone can do. It's free. I'll have a link. You don't have to don't give us your email address or anything. I don't want anything from you. I just want you to see the list of symptoms. There are a bunch of symptoms and they are grouped in categories or boxes, basically. If you have one symptom in that category or box, then you have that box. And if you have 8 out of the 13 possible boxes, there's like a 90 something percent chance you have CIRS. That's it. So that's the easiest, lowest threshold. You right now can pause this video and go look at the symptoms and see if this matches your experience. And some of the symptoms that are on there that she has is like the itchiness, the skin issues, the burning, the tingling sensations, the sleep disturbance, vertigo, emotional like anxiety, that side of things. Like all of those things are up there on this list. So I'm first want anyone who's interested or thinks they might have something similar to take a look at the symptoms. And if you have eight or even if you have seven out of the 13 boxes, like you're on the edge, like I would then go to the next level of confirming. And if you have a doctor who's really cool and will order blood work for you, that's amazing. If you don't have someone like that, maybe you can find one that's covered by insurance and get these blood markers checked. Do you want to talk about that a bit more, Christian?
Yeah. And then I'll add also, so yes, doing that symptoms, it's 37 symptoms total,
Mhm.
right? And there's this criteria if you have, the boxes, I love how you talked about it. We call them clusters.
Yes,
And for adults, it's typically eight clusters. If you're positive for at least one symptom in eight clusters, that puts you like suspicious, okay, we should look into this more.
right.
There is a reasonably high probability that you might be in the CIRS category. And then there's a visual contrast sensitivity test or VCS test that you can do also along with the symptom assessment that Barbara just described. And those are often used as screening tools, right? As an entry point. I think how much is the VCS? Is it
It's like
$15?
15, one five,
Yeah.
$15 to do. We don't make any money from
No, we
that.
don't.
The
This
the
is not
best
a.
the best one to go to would be on survivingmold.com. Then you
Mhm.
can go to the visual contrast sensitivity test that's on there. You don't have to calibrate it. There's another one at vcstest.com or is it .org? We'll have the
VCS says I think it's .com,
I
but
think it's
we'll
.com.
yeah.
We don't recommend that one anymore. One, because the research hasn't been done on it specifically, but the one on the Surviving Mold website has the research that connects it with CIRS. Um, that's an oversimplified way to explain it, but that's why. But also VCStest.com, you have to kind of calibrate your screen, and it can be really complicated and annoying to do. So
Yep.
the one on survivingmold.com does not have that like extra hurdle you have to get over. So we direct people there, and I'll have the link to go to that as well. I understand if you don't want to spend 15 bucks to look at a thing and see if you can see blurred lines. That's basically what it is. It's a series of images where you have to determine which way lines are facing, and they're going to get really hard to see towards, the end of each column.
Right.
And that's going to test your ability to see blurred lines, which is affected when you have high inflammation in your body. You're literally your eyes will be less able to see that contrast, and that is what the test is going to determine.
And specifically, there's a pattern of failing the test can that has been strongly correlated with inflammation due to exposure to biotoxins.
Right.
And there's published research on this. And so that's the idea that okay, if you fail the test in a specific pattern, um, that already is telling us, okay, so you are a patient or you're someone who's at high risk of having CIRS. And the thing I want to say very quickly here is the cool thing about what we know about CIRS is, as Barbara already mentioned, we can actually treat it. And one of the things that we can do with this treatment is have you pass the visual contrast sensitivity test.
Yeah.
So, and that's a very cool thing because it shows that this inflammation that's going on in the brain is starting to calm down.
Yeah.
And that's a very powerful thing, empowering thing for a patient to be able to witness that. So, okay, so that's VCS and symptoms, and then there's all these blood markers. Maybe I'll just say them
Just
quickly.
yeah, well, you've talked about I think at
Yeah.
least four already, so we
Yeah, I
can
talked about the MSH, the hormone tends to be low, chronically low in CIRS patients, deficient. MMP9 tends to be chronically high.
mhm.
I mentioned VEGF, tends to be low, but sometimes we'll see it chronically elevated as well. Then there is another one called TGF beta 1, we tend to see it high as well. It's also a marker of inflammatory activity that we see in CIRS. Then we'll see other hormones like the antidiuretic hormone or ADH, and then you can measure that together with another marker called osmolality, and that tells you about water mineral retention, which becomes dysfunctional in certain patients. So some patients will start developing like they start peeing like 30 times a day, which happened to me. And they don't have diabetes necessarily or anything like that. And they might be very healthy and suddenly they need to go to the bathroom 20, 30 times a day, or they have a lot of thirst and they can't control it. It doesn't matter how much water they drink. And so that would be that marker, ADH and osmolality. And then another one would be VIP, which is vasoactive intestinal peptide, which is another hormone. We see it often also become chronically low. There's a few other markers. I would say those are sort of very core
Yeah.
basic markers, and you can get them at a Labcorp, which is the nice thing. Oh, and the other one I should say is you can get tested for the genetic susceptibility. So there's a test, I think it's called HLA-DRB1, and that will test to see if you have, which genes do you have there and see if they are part of this bundle of genes that have been associated with increased risk for CIRS.
Yeah, and if all of that sounds like a lot, which I totally understand if it does, the cool thing about the genetic one that Christian just talked about is that there's a website, again, no affiliation, no kickbacks, not making any money off this. Life Extensions is a website you can go to that has what's nice about this is it's just like a saliva
Yeah.
swab in your mouth to test for the genetic portion. So if you want to do the genetic part on your own without involving a doctor, making an appointment, convincing your doctor to order all this crazy blood work or whatever, all that stuff, you can at least go confirm the genetics on your own. You can just order it on the website, do it from home, mail it back, and then get your answer that way. And then once you have that answer, further confirmation. A lot of people need to do these little baby steps to like, is this real? Is this really going to apply to me? And so that that's why I think we're giving you kind of like a trail of things to do one at a time to help you confirm for yourself whether or not this is right for you, if this is your diagnosis. And then from there, start involving a specialist that can actually help you deal with it and treat it. Which I guess now is a good time to talk when we're almost done, guys. I know it's a long episode, but I want to just go over some of the things that Mikayla Matthews has tried to do to heal. And we can even talk a little bit about why those haven't worked. And then I want to finally get to the part of actual treatment that will help her and help people like her if
Mhm.
she has CIRS, if that is her diagnosis. So, one thing that she did attempt to do, which was brilliant of her to have figured out, is she got her breast implants removed. She thought maybe she was experiencing breast implant illness, which is thankfully being talked about more. A lot more people are realizing that putting some foreign object in your body can have its issues, can introduce bacteria and mold itself on its own, but also can cause a lot of other problems when, especially if your body's already in a state of inflammation, it's just going to attack everything that it can, and that can cause some problems. So she did get it removed. She had some complications and actually had to go in for a second surgery to remove a hematoma. So that sounded really traumatic and scary. Um, but then she also was doing some research and found out that her root canal could be infected and be an issue. So she had that removed. She also had all of her mercury fillings removed because she learned about that metal detox. Like all of those things are important as well and could be contributing to her illness, which is likely. All of these things are good that she did. I'm not knocking any of this. I think the only problem with it is that it's not addressing the root cause, which is the biotoxins that are already in her body. All of these other detox methods she's trying don't appear to be working, and we can kind of explain why. But Christian, did you have a comment on any of that part?
Yeah, well, just right, like you see this a lot with CIRS patients. They'll do a lot of detox protocols. I certainly had my share of things to do that I tried before knowing up that I had CIRS, and I did like let's say like activated charcoal, a lot of liver support. I treated my gut for like SIBO and all these things. And what you tend to see with CIRS patients is they do these things and maybe they get better temporarily, But then they relapse again. It's almost like the body goes back to square one, and you're asking yourself, what's going on here? And it's as Barbara said, it's because uh, you're not really treating the underlying problem, which is you have an immune dysregulation triggered by microbial toxins, not heavy metals and not inorganic toxins like pesticides or even not necessarily microplastics. Although all of these things can be, there's good literature, right, that we know that all these things can be harmful. We're not saying that. But when it comes to CIRS, those are not the primary offenders in the illness.
Right.
It's microbial toxins most commonly found in water damaged buildings. And I think that's a really good um, example of that. And at the end of the day, CIRS patients, if they have root canals, they probably have to work on that one way or another. If they have breast implants, that can certainly add to the burden, and they may have to work on that as well. But that's usually done as a sort of once you started treating the CIRS, then you start moving towards, okay, let's remove all these things that are contributing, but they're more like downstream problems.
Right.
So yeah.
And that's the other thing I would say about all the things that she's tried. I do want to point out she got real close to the CIRS idea. She never said the word CIRS. However, in 2023, there's a TikTok that she has linked from her Instagram account. That's how I found it. And she talks about figuring out that there's a mold issue in her current home as of 2023 and realizing that she had to move out. Now, the way that she figured this out was she ended up taking a urinary mycotoxin test, which is where a test where you can pee and then send your pee to be tested to see what mold is coming out of your pee or of you. There is, I'm glad she found that, and I guess I will be happy about this test existing because it is often the first gateway people go through to realize mold may be the problem. The issue with this test, however, is that it is showing in your pee, by definition, it's showing what you have eliminated from your body. Some mold has come out. Everyone eliminates mold this way. Like whether you're sick or not, it doesn't matter. If you eat a moldy blueberry, it will show up as mold coming out of your pee later. So the problem with it is that even if it shows that there's like, oh, the species of mold, like some practitioners think that the species of mold is important and might treat you differently depending on what molds show up. And that's why they have you do this test. That's not what has been seen in the research, though. And that's not the treat. You don't need all of that extra data to know that the mold is the issue and you can treat it a different way. Christian, do you have more to add to this? I don't feel like
Yeah,
I'm
that's
explaining it very well, but
no, that's great. I think
yeah.
the issue you nailed at a fundamental problem with mycotoxin urine test, which is we can't use it to make a diagnosis, or the doctors that treat CIRS, it's not diagnostic, it's not useful for diagnosing CIRS. Part of it is what you said, which is, okay, well, how do you differentiate a healthy person who's not getting sick from the moldy environment and they do the urine test and they're excreting high amounts, right? And sometimes you see sick patients and it doesn't necessarily correspond to what you think is going on in the environment. So it's not clear how to think about that test from a diagnostic perspective. And like you said, a lot of these biotoxins that are making us sick, we recirculate them. We have a problem eliminating them, right? Once this CIRS gets triggered. So what we're looking for is what we can't see directly. So we have to think about what are those toxins triggering in the body? And that's where we look at the immune markers and the hormones that we just mentioned, right? There's these biomarkers that become dysfunctional and abnormal in response to the presence of those biotoxins.
Yep, exactly. And that's why we didn't mention the urinary mycotoxin test when we were talking about getting diagnosed. We talked
Yeah.
about blood markers, the visual contrast sensitivity test, and the symptom clusters. So
Yeah.
those are and also history of exposure, which based
Yes.
on what she's shared publicly, we know that she has. So that's where you also can kind of like follow that trail to confirm or deny a diagnosis for yourself. Um, and and so she's tried all these things, but not once. And I've only known about Mikayla Matthews since uh, Secret Lives of Mormon Wives has come out. I didn't know about Mom Talk. I didn't know about any of these influencers until this show showed up. I didn't even hear about the whole scandal that happened, that kind of caused them all to like blow up anyway. So point being, there's probably a lot of content out there that I've missed. If you're a giant, huge, longtime fan of hers, please let me know in the comments what I may have missed. I'm open to that. But I do want to say that from what I have seen, I have never heard her talk about taking binders. Binders are important for actually getting rid of the mold and the toxins, and not just any binders. Most people who think they have a mold issue unfortunately end up with a practitioner who's doing the more mainstream mold treatment, which is weird to say because mold illness is already kind of like this alternative. Not everyone believes in it, like all that crap. But a lot of, like you already mentioned, charcoal, clay, fiber, like all these things that people will take. And those things do bind. They are binders by definition. They'll bind to things and pull them out of your body in your poop or pee or whatever. But they are not the appropriate charge or size to specifically attach to biotoxins from mold or other biotoxins. That this can
The
also
ones that trigger CIRS, basically.
anything that it triggers CIRS. And again, we have a whole episode on what is CIRS that you can go look at to get a whole list of all the biotoxins that are at play here. But the binders that are appropriate for specifically CIRS and mold illness in general are unfortunately prescriptions. So you do need a doctor to get them, but it is either Welchol, generic name is colesevelam, or cholestyramine, which is it's in a powder form and it is stronger than Welchol. And we often abbreviate it as CSM because cholestyramine is a very long word. But those are the two binders that are prescription. They're basically old school cholesterol lowering medications
Mhm.
that are being used kind of off label to bind the biotoxins from the body and help your body remove them. Christian,
Yeah.
do you want to add some science to what I just said? Because I know
No,
I was being a little bit
that is the
flippant.
science. You just
Okay.
laid it out. But I what I would just add maybe is going back to the visual contrast sensitivity test. One of the first, basically the first step, other than, well, you have to remove this person from the exposure. If they're living in a moldy house, the first step is you got to get them in a clean space so that they can do the treatment. Otherwise, nothing works. And this is
Yeah.
the recurring theme with CIRS patients. They try everything and anything, and if they're not in a clean enough environment, the immune system just gets stuck and the body gets stuck. But once you're in a clean environment, right? One of the really the first milestone is, okay, if you failed your VCS test, the first thing we want to see is, can we get you to pass that VCS test? And the intervention becomes these binders, these cholesterol sequestering medications, cholestyramine, or Welchol. The intervals, the duration for those can vary. It can be anywhere between 2 to 6 months, typically. It will depend on the patient, but at some point, basically, you're assessing your VCS performance maybe once a month, and what we expect is for your VCS to improve dramatically, if not just pass it altogether. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. And that's the hope that we hope this episode brings to you, is that you can, you know, dealing with the first step, which is removing yourself from exposure, it does sound, I don't know where Mikayla lives now versus where she lived before. I know she has moved. She's talked about moving in the last couple years. So, the way to confirm if your home is safe is the best way to do so is with a medically informed indoor environmental professional or somebody who really understands the molds that can cause CIRS. And they can come and do an inspection on your house, do testing on your house to confirm whether or not it is safe, medically safe for you. Now, there's going to be a little mold in every house. That's how we build houses here in the States and actually most of the world. And it's unfortunately they're prime locations for mold to grow. We just need to do our absolute best to prevent the possibility of water intrusion, water damage, things that will then trigger mold to grow and then cause the home to not be safe. But there are tests that an indoor environmental professional would do. They're called dust test basically, and one that most people recognize is called the ERMI, ERMI, ERMI dust test. And you just take a you order it, you get a sanitized, not sanitized,
Like
but
a Swiffer cloth,
a Swiffer cloth
basically.
that hasn't touched anything else with a glove, and you wipe the dust around in your house, you send it off, and you find out all the species of molds that you have and what levels of them. And then from there, you can determine with some assurance, depending on the score, and the score isn't everything. Again, that's why I do start with saying hire somebody like an indoor environmental
Mhm.
professional, an IEP, to help you understand the report. But at the very least, what you can do is order the test for your home, do it, and see what the situation is to confirm or deny whether or not this is a relatively safe home. There are a couple other biotoxins you can also test for. We don't need to get into all the details here. Again, we have episodes on all of the things, but I'll just mention endotoxins are another biotoxin that can cause problems, and that is poop, basically. So if you've ever had a toilet overflow or something, sewage leak or something awful like that in your home, that's absolutely a factor that can cause CIRS. And then the other thing is actinos, which is basically a bacteria that eats mold or hangs out with mold. They party together, they have a good time. Those bacteria can also cause inflammation, and you could breathe those in just like the endos and the mycotoxins, the mold.
If you have
So
musty or earthy smells, that's actinobacteria, that is not mold.
yes, yes. Interesting. I mean, though I said they party together. So you probably have mold too,
Oh, you can have
but
both.
the smell, mold is actually odorless, which is weird. And even the effects of it are odorless, but the actinos is what's causing that gross smell.
Yeah.
So, yes, if you have any of that, your home is likely not safe, but you do want to test it to be sure. Step one treatment is getting out of exposure, finding a safe home to live in, and that's much harder to do than just the way I've said it. It sounds so simple when I say it, but you find a safe home, and then you start the binders, and then you repeatedly do the blood test or the VCS test to see, are the binders working? Are you healing? You also, tune in with your body, see if your symptoms are getting better, and over time you should really notice a difference. And like Christian said, a few months. The only caveat I will add to that is CIRS, by definition, is a dysregulated immune system, which means that other crap can infiltrate when you are in this dysregulated immune system situation.
Hmm.
So you may at the end of treating CIRS, you may find you have a candida issue to address, or Lyme or a tick-borne infection thing to address, or SIBO that you can now treat, and when you treat it, it'll actually not come back, that sort of thing. So it's kind of like you have to do it in the right order, which is treating the exposure, getting out of exposure, and then taking binders and getting that out of your system literally. And then you can attack you. I guess my point is the finish line isn't necessarily treating CIRS and you're good. You may have other things to treat after
Hmm.
the fact, but at least now those treatments should work.
Yeah.
And that is what we want people to know and hopefully take away from this. And if you are looking for a doctor that can help you through this process, generally what we recommend is people go back to survivingmold.com, the same place with the VCS test that we talked about, to find a certified Shoemaker protocol practitioner. That is the doctor who has done 30 years of research, tons of clinical work to prove without a shadow of doubt that these binders that we named help with this mold illness, CIRS. That's the kind of doctor you want to help you through this process. And I make this a very big point because there's lots and lots of doctors out there who deal with mold. But if you see them using binders like charcoal and clay and using urinary mycotoxin tests only to help you heal, that's where I would just be a little bit skeptical and try to find somebody who acknowledges the Shoemaker protocol and incorporates that into your treatment plan. Anything to add to
That's a great way to
that?
put it.
Yeah. I think, I think that does it for, I hope Mikayla Matthews herself sees this episode and starts down this path. If not, I hope her fans or people who relate to her have seen this episode and now have some answers for themselves. I hate to see people suffer. And when I saw her story, it was just screaming CIRS to me so loudly. And the fact that I know to this day, she like as of like a couple weeks ago, within the last couple weeks of filming this, she has complained about still having issues, still having skin problems, a lot of the like GI stuff, trying to get her diet right. She does weekly IV treatments of glutathione and like zinc and all kinds of stuff just to try to like help her body heal. And I just know how much money that costs, how much time
Mhm.
and energy that costs. And I hope that she's able to do a treatment that actually will work, which is the Shoemaker protocol, yeah, I
Yeah.
believe. So I hope she gets the diagnosis and goes down that path if it's right for her.
Yeah.
But all that said, if you would like to learn more about CIRS and have some community support at the same time, first I want to say, Christian, you can follow him on Instagram at CIRS Lab. We'll have the link in the description. He also has a community, cirslab.com, to go check out as well. Of course, we have the CIRS group. We have our own community for emotional support for people dealing with CIRS. We have our own Instagram account with a lot of info. And of course, obviously, the weekly podcast as well. Free info to help people learn more about it and get themselves on the treatment plan that they need to actually get better. Is there anything else you want to plug or mention, Christian?
No, I think no. Thank you for having me. I think this is an important thing. These are I think we want to have conversations around these chronic illnesses that are becoming more and more popular. Mold illness, you're right, it's still kind of like it's sort of alternative medicine type of thing, but in that world, it's become extremely mainstream in the functional medicine world. And what we're trying to do here is just to bring the right level of awareness and education and as much as we can the right level of nuance to understand what is it that we know works from a scientific perspective. There's been papers published on CIRS and this treatment protocol, right? What we know works, and to make sure that people have access to that, including Mikayla.
Yes. And I will link published research in the notes below. So you have everything you need if you go to, if you're watching this in the show notes or even listening, I'll put them in the show notes for the podcast as well. Um, yeah, take a look at all of that stuff. It's all there. It's a lot. I understand if it feels overwhelming, but just one step at a time. Just look at the symptom clusters, see if it matches up with what your experience is, and then take it from there, one thing at a time. But thank you again so much. Thank you, Christian, for being here with me and you know, nerding out on a very potentially silly reality show with me and getting some health benefit out of it, I hope, for others. So thank you. And of course, for more information and support, you can visit us over at theCIRSgroup.com. See you guys.